On the morning of February 15, 2017, a Caltrans inspector walked out onto the Pfeiffer Canyon Bridge in Big Sur, California, and found cracks in the concrete. Nothing had hit it. There had been no earthquake. No truck had struck a pier. The bridge was 310 feet of reinforced concrete, built in 1967, rated and inspected and entirely ordinary. It was tearing itself apart. The hillside the bridge was anchored into had begun to move, slowly, silently, a few inches at a time, and the bridge, being rigid, was being pulled in two directions at once. Within days, the state declared it unsalvageable. Within weeks, they demolished it with explosives because there was no safe way to take it down by hand. That left a problem. Highway 1 was already closed by landslides to the north and to the south. With the bridge gone, roughly 450 residents of Big Sur were not on a highway anymore. They were on an island, so they built a trail, a footpath scratched across the ridge above the canyon, steep enough that people used ropes on the worst pitch. Locals called it the Goat Trail. Hotel workers hiked it to get to their shifts. Groceries came over it in backpacks. A pregnant woman was carried out on it. Here is the detail that matters, and it is easy to miss. Nothing unusual had happened. It rained. That was all. It rained hard for a winter, on a mountain that was doing exactly what that mountain has always done. Which raises a question that the rest of this story exists to answer. Why would anyone build a highway in a place where a wet winter can simply erase it? The answer is not an engineering failure. The answer is that the road was never supposed to be what it became. To understand the road, you have to start with a man who had no road at all. Dr. John Lincoln Roberts was a physician in Monterey in the 1890s. His practice extended south along the coast, into country that had no through route of any kind. Ranches and homesteads scattered along the flanks of the Santa Lucia Mountains, reachable by horse trail or by boat when the sea allowed, or not at all. Roberts lost patients to distance, not to disease, to distance. A broken leg 2 days away is a different injury than a broken leg 2 hours away. Families on that coast could take 3 days to bring a wagon into Monterey and 3 days to get home. In 1897, he decided to prove that a road was possible. He walked it from Monterey south towards San Luis Obispo, roughly 180 miles of Cliff Canyon and Chaparral in about 4 days, taking notes the entire way on where a roadbed might go. Then he produced an estimate, $50,000. Hold on to that number. Roberts spent the next 20 years arguing for his road and getting nowhere. Sacramento was not interested in spending public money to reach a few hundred ranchers. Scenery was not an argument in 1900. Medicine was not an argument either. What finally worked was fear. The First World War ended in 1918, and California suddenly noticed something about its own map. It had 600 miles of Pacific coastline, and along its most rugged stretch, there was no way to move a single soldier or gun from north to south. A state senator from Cambria named Elmer Rigdon carried the argument into the legislature in 1919, and it was framed not as a scenic highway or a mercy road, but as coastal defense. The bill passed, $1.5 million. Pause on that because it explains a great deal of what follows. The Pacific Coast Highway was authorized as military infrastructure. It was funded by a fear of invasion that never came. That founding logic will matter later, when the road has to justify its own repair bills and discovers it has no purpose left except to be beautiful. Construction began in 1922, and the estimate collapsed almost immediately. The problem was the rock, and the problem with the rock is that it is barely rock at all. The Santa Lucia Range is built largely of Franciscan melange, material scraped off the floor of an ocean and crushed between colliding plates, sheared and folded and mixed until it has no reliable structure. It is a mountain range assembled from wreckage. It is also still rising, faster than almost any coastal range on Earth, and a mountain that rises quickly, sheds quickly. Big Sur is not eroding because something went wrong. Erosion is the only thing it does. Crews found that they could not cut a shelf into these slopes and expect it to stay. They blasted and the blast loosened more above. They graded and the winter took the grade. There was a second problem. Nobody wanted the work. It was remote, dangerous, and badly paid. The state's solution was San Quentin. 3 prison camps were established along the route. Convicts were paid 35 cents a day and, far more valuable, days off their sentences. Men drilled powder holes by hand on cliff faces above the surf and reduced a mountainside to gravel a charge at a time. The highway through Big Sur was not built so much as it was blasted into existence. 33 bridges were required to cross the canyons. The most famous of them, Bixby Creek, was completed in 1932, 714 feet long, standing about 280 feet above the creek bed. Built for roughly $200,000 because there was no other way across and no road yet to carry materials in. On June 27, 1937, 18 years after Rigdon's bill, the highway opened. Final cost, approximately $10 million. Roberts had said $50,000. He was not incompetent. He was reading the wrong document. He had estimated the cost of building a road. What the mountain had actually quoted him was the cost of holding ground on a slope that does not want a road on it. And that is not a purchase. It is a subscription. Nobody in 1937 calculated the annual installments. There is a fact about the new highway that almost nobody mentioned at the ribbon cutting, and it is the strangest thing about the entire project. It didn't go anywhere. US Highway 101 already ran north to south through the inland valleys. Flatter, faster, safer, open in all weather. Freight used 101. Buses used 101. Anyone with somewhere to be used, 101. The new coastal highway served a population of a few hundred, carried almost no commercial traffic, and took longer to drive. The invasion it had been funded to repel never materialized, and when war did come, the Coast Road's military role amounted to patrols watching an empty ocean. So the road sat there, $10 million of blasted cliff, waiting for a purpose. Tourists supplied one. After the Second World War, America acquired cars, highways, paid vacations, and a national appetite for driving somewhere for no reason other than the drive. Big Sur was perfectly positioned for it. In 1949, a family opened a restaurant on a ridge above the water called Nepenthe, on land bought from Orson Welles. Henry Miller lived on Partington Ridge and wrote about the place until people came looking for him. Jack Kerouac published Big Sur in 1962. Hearst Castle opened to the public in 1958 and put a destination at the southern end of the drive. Within 20 years, the road's function had completely inverted. It had been built to end isolation. It now sold isolation, by the night, to people who drove hundreds of miles to experience a place that had been valuable precisely because you couldn't get there. That inversion is the hinge of this entire story, and its consequence is financial rather than philosophical. A road that carries freight is infrastructure. When it breaks, ports, warehouses, supermarkets, and payrolls break with it, and money appears to fix it because the alternative is more expensive. A road that carries a view is something else. When it breaks, the cost of repair has to be justified by the value of scenery. And scenery has no lobbyists, no supply chain, and no leverage. For 50 years, that distinction didn't matter because the repairs were manageable. Then they weren't. The first sign appeared 200 miles north of Big Sur, and almost everyone misread it. Just south of Pacifica, Highway 1 crosses a headland called Devil's Slide. The name is not decorative. The road was cut across an active, ancient landslide in the 1930s, and it began failing almost immediately. It closed in the 1940s. It closed in the 1950s. It closed repeatedly through the 1970s and 1980s. In 1995, it closed for 158 consecutive days, and the state spent millions putting it back. Caltrans had wanted out for decades. Its proposed solution, first drawn up in the 1960s, was a bypass carved through Montara Mountain. A project environmental groups fought for 30 years, on the grounds that it would open the last undeveloped stretch of that coast to sprawl. In 1996, San Mateo County voters settled it. They chose a tunnel. The Tom Lantos tunnels opened in 2013, roughly 4,200 feet of bore through the mountain at a cost of about $439 million. The old roadway across the slide was abandoned and converted into a walking trail. It was celebrated as an environmental victory, and it was won. But look at what actually happened, stripped of the framing. The state of California spent nearly $500 million for the specific purpose of no longer maintaining 1 mile of coastal highway. It did not defeat the landslide. It conceded the landslide and went inside the mountain to get away from it. Nobody used the word retreat. There was no policy announcement, no press conference, no admission that a line had been abandoned. It was presented as a local engineering solution to a local geological problem. It was the first one. It would not be the last. And the pattern that begins here, a withdrawal described as an improvement, is the reason this story has the word quietly in its title. Everything so far had a rhythm to it. The mountain took the road, the state put it back, the tourists returned. Expensive but survivable. What broke the rhythm was a variable that has nothing obvious to do with roads. In July 2016, an illegal campfire in Garapata State Park started what became the Soberangs Fire. It burned about 132,000 acres above Big Sur, killed a bulldozer operator, and cost roughly $260 million to fight. At the time, the most expensive wildfire suppression operation in American history. The fire itself did not close the highway for long. What the fire did was to the hillsides, and it is worth understanding precisely because it explains the last decade of this road. A living slope is held together by roots. Burn the vegetation off and the roots die, and the soil loses its reinforcement. Intense heat also bakes a water-repellent layer into the ground, so that rain no longer soaks in. It runs off, gathers, and loads the loose material above. A burned slope in a wet winter does not erode gradually. It fails all at once. The winter that followed Soberangs was one of the wettest California has recorded. That was the winter the Pfeiffer Canyon Bridge pulled apart, and the residents built the Goat Trail. And on May 20th, 2017, while the bridge was still rubble, the mountain delivered the rest of the invoice. At Mud Creek, near the southern end of the Big Sur coast, roughly 6 million cubic yards of hillside came down onto the highway. Not a slide across the road, a slide that took the road and then kept going into the Pacific, pushing the shoreline outward. Caltrans looked at the scale of it and made a decision that tells you exactly where things now stood. They did not remove it. 13 months and about $54 million later, the highway reopened, rebuilt on top of the landslide, across roughly a dozen acres of California that had not existed before. The engineering was extraordinary. The message underneath it was simpler. The state's greatest victory on this coast was achieved by agreeing to the mountain's terms. Now the sequence accelerates, and it stops being a story about geology. August 2020, the Dolan Fire, later attributed to arson, burns roughly 125,000 acres through the heart of the Big Sur backcountry. New burn scars, new unstable slopes. January 28, 2021, an atmospheric river parks over those scars. At Rat Creek, 150 feet of Highway 1, roadbed, asphalt, fill, everything is simply gone, flushed into the ocean. Photographs show a clean rectangular absence, as though the road had been edited out. It reopens in April. January 2023, winter storms reactivate Paul's Slide. That closure lasts more than a year. March 30th, 2024. At Rocky Creek on Easter weekend, the southbound lane drops away without warning. Roughly 1,600 people are on the wrong side of it. They are brought out under escort, and for months afterward, the only way through is a convoy that runs on a schedule, twice a day, weather permitting. Add it up and the pattern becomes something no single closure reveals. Across most of the years between 2017 and 2025, it was not possible to drive the Big Sur coast end to end. The businesses felt it first. Inns, restaurants, and campgrounds on that stretch depend on travelers who are passing through, and there were fewer and fewer weeks in which anyone could pass through. But the deeper effect is behavioral, and this is the mechanism the title is asking about. A road does not lose its travelers when it closes. It loses them when people stop assuming it will be open. Consider how the trip actually works. Someone in Ohio or Texas decides in February to drive the California coast in July. They book flights, a rental car, 4 hotels in a line. That entire plan rests on one unexamined assumption, that the road will be there. The moment that assumption fails, The moment will the highway be open becomes a question you have to research, monitor, and hedge against. The trip stops competing on beauty. It starts competing on risk. And it is now competing against every other vacation in America that requires no research at all. Most of the time, it loses. There was no announcement. No one closed the Pacific Coast Highway. It closed and reopened, and closed and reopened, and each cycle removed a little more of the road from the country's mental map of things you can simply decide to do. Attrition by uncertainty. That is the quiet part. 400 miles south, the same highway was failing for entirely different reasons and arriving at the same place. Through Malibu, PCH is not a wilderness road. It is a 21-mile urban arterial with driveways, restaurants, bus stops, and beach parking on both sides, carrying tens of thousands of vehicles a day at speeds it was never designed for. Roughly 60 people have been killed along that stretch since 2010. In October 2023, a speeding driver struck and killed 4 Pepperdine University seniors standing on the shoulder. Malibu declared a local emergency over the highway itself. A state task force was convened. Lawmakers authorized speed cameras on the corridor. The road had become dangerous enough that governing it required emergency powers. Then came January 7, 2025. The Palisades fire moved toward the coast faster than traffic could clear it. PCH was the evacuation route, and PCH is 2 lanes in each direction, with the ocean on one side and burning hills on the other. It jammed. People abandoned their cars and ran, and bulldozers came through afterward to push the empty vehicles aside so that fire engines could get in. The fire killed 12 people and destroyed thousands of structures across Pacific Palisades and Malibu. The highway itself became a corridor of debris and hazardous material, closed to the public for months and not fully reopened to general traffic until late May. Afterward, insurers accelerated a withdrawal from the California coast that had already begun. Non-renewals, higher premiums, and a state insurer of last resort absorbing risk that private carriers no longer wanted. 2 ends of the same highway, one losing to a mountain that will not stop moving, the other to fire and density and speed. Different mechanisms entirely. Identical result, a road that cannot be counted on. There is one more piece, and it is the one that turns a series of accidents into something else. At Gleason Beach in Sonoma County, houses had been falling into the ocean for decades. By the 2010s, the highway itself was within meters of the edge. Caltrans had armored, patched, and shored it for years. This time, the agency did not defend the alignment. It moved the road inland onto new ground and let the old roadbed go. In the technical documents, it is a realignment project. In practice, engineers and coastal advocates recognized it as something without real precedent on the California state highway system: managed retreat, the deliberate abandonment of a position because holding it was no longer worth the cost. Now line them up. Devil's Slide. Go inside the mountain rather than maintain the coast. Mud Creek. Stop excavating and build on top of the failure. Gleason Beach. Move the road away from the sea. Big Sur. Accept that the route will be open in windows and run convoys in between. Not one of those was ever presented to the public as retreat. Each was framed as a targeted solution to a specific local problem, and each, individually, was defensible. Together, they constitute a policy that no legislature ever debated and no agency ever named. Because naming it would require answering a question California has no good answer to. If the sea is rising, the storms are intensifying, and the fire seasons no longer end, how much of this coastline can a road still be built along? And all of this landed on a country that was already, for unrelated reasons, driving less. American vehicle miles per person peaked in the mid-2000s and never fully recovered. In 1983, roughly 46% of 16-year-olds held a driver's license. 4 decades later, it was closer to a quarter. The Great American Road Trip did not die, but it stopped being automatic. At precisely the moment the most famous drive in the country became something you had to check on before you left. The Pfeiffer Canyon Bridge was rebuilt in about 7 months and opened in October 2017. A single elegant span with no piers in the canyon at all, because engineers had finally accepted that anything they planted in that hillside would eventually be dragged apart. It is a genuinely impressive piece of work, and it is the same lesson the mountain has been teaching since 1922. Go back to the doctor walking south in 1897 with a notebook, estimating $50,000. He was not wrong about the value of the road. He was wrong about what he was buying. The convicts, the dynamite, the 33 bridges, and the $10 million did not purchase a highway. They purchased 1 year of a highway, and every year since has required another payment, a payment that has grown larger as the fires have grown bigger and the winters have grown wetter, and the mountain has kept doing the only thing it knows how to do. Americans did not decide to stop driving the Pacific Coast Highway. There was no boycott, no scandal, no moment of collective judgment. What happened is quieter and harder to see. The road stopped being reliable, then stopped being plannable, and a drive you cannot plan slowly stops being a drive at all. It becomes a destination you approach from one end, photograph, and turn around. A doctor once walked this coast for 4 days because there was no way through. It took 40 years and $10 million to make a way through. It has taken less than 90 to begin quietly handing it back.